Good afternoon, everybody. Welcome back to the Tech and Innovation stage. I'm David Cushnan, Head of Content at Leaders. Good to have you with us as we head something close to the final stretch of Leaders Week London. A couple of really good sessions for you on this stage this afternoon. As you will know by now, I hope, and I have checked my contract and I am contractually obliged to continue mentioning this, you can ask questions to any of our speakers by downloading the official Leaders app and clicking on Speaker Interaction, or going to slido.com, S-L-I-D-O, and using the code #Leaders. Our next session is going to discuss how you can deepen the knowledge of your fan base and ultimately drive commercial value from it and provide a better service to fans through careful and clever use of data. We've brought this session together with Pumpjack Dataworks, a data bank to help you collect, control, value and trade your data, making that data accessible and immediately useful for your business. And we've got a couple of experts to have a good old chit chat about what they're doing now. So do welcome Nick Goggans, CEO and founder of Pumpjack Dataworks, and alongside him the Chief Marketing Officer of the Williams Formula One team, Tim Hunt. Welcome, gents. Thanks ever so much for being with us. And we're going to get into a discussion now, as I said, about fans, about data, about the relationship between data and fans, I guess, in some respects, and to see how it all fits together from a Formula One team's perspective, Tim. First of all, and I'm sure there are many people in the room very familiar with Formula One and how it works, but just paint a picture, if you would, of the setup and the sort of fan segmentation that you're working with in Formula One.
No problem. It's an interesting time for everyone in Formula One. There's this big discussion around the Netflix effect and what Drive to Survive has done to the sport. And some might say anecdotally, there is some empirical evidence to suggest that effectively Drive to Survive has doubled the Formula One audience base, which is obviously significant. And the key element to that is because of the nature of the programming, it's increased the audience base through a team agnostic point of view. So there's effectively a bit of an arms race. There's a Wild West element of how can each team now head into that landscape, capture that audience, turn them into fans, etc., and then obviously grow their own fan base, their own consumer base. So the segmentation piece is actually getting more interesting because it's not what it used to be. It's not the traditional. I think Formula One has traditionally worked on a kind of 6-segment audience base. We're now, certainly from a Williams perspective, we're now looking at 10 to 12 segments, which goes, and obviously those outer segments go way beyond people who give a damn whether we come first, fifth or 10th. So actually then that starts to create the challenge, but also the opportunity of how do you engage that audience, how do you acquire that audience, how do you bring them in from top of funnel.
I'm not going to ask you to name those 12 segments.
No, thank God. I said 12.
Could you?
Yes, I could. I made
That's all we need to know. That's all we need to know. So you have, and you also have, beyond those fan segments you talked about, at a sort of higher level, you have fans of the sport, who might be avid, might be casual, and you talked about the Netflix effect. You've got fans of any one of the 10 teams.
Yeah.
You've also got fans of individual drivers who might follow that driver as they move over several years around different teams. So it's quite in some ways, a complicated setup you've got. How much do you know about Williams F1 fans in 2021?
Nowhere near enough. Absolutely nowhere near enough. I think, there is I use the term when I talk about the previous segmentation of F1, the traditional segmentation of F1, and unfortunately it has been traditional in its thinking. It is a petrol-head audience through to a casual armchair fan, and I could layer that type of segmentation across any sport at the moment, and everybody goes, yeah, that makes sense. So I think it's been too formulaic to this point. It's been a little bit too generalistic, if that's a word, to this point. So very much the key to what we're trying to do now with Nick and his team and their help is to really stick to those segments, appreciate the expansion of those segments, but now then start to really drill down into exactly what that means. And it means a massively complicated landscape from a content provision, content serving, engagement point of view, because you now have multi-channel, multi-segment, multi-need, and multi-perspective kind of plans you have to create and content you have to serve. Serving content to the outer segments who really don't care about the racing. And what do you do about that? At Williams, we're in the process of kind of redefining and relaunching the Williams brand. And the vision of that brand is a Williams beyond racing, deliberately to enable us to go beyond the kind of core 6 segments and talk to people about different things, but still in a Williams ecosystem.
So is that sort of almost approaching, and I know you're not there yet with that work, but is that almost approaching a sort of Williams as a lifestyle brand?
Yeah, exactly that. That's exactly the intention. We launch our sustainability strategy next week, for example, and part of that, quite apart from what that means, part of that is designed to engage an audience who will have an affinity with Williams because of our sustainability strategy, not because of how many tenths of a second faster our car is next year.
Nick, let's bring you in at this point. Pumpjack Dataworks, I think many people will be familiar with the company and you and what you do, but for anybody who's not, just give us the brief summary and then in particular how you're working with Tim and the Williams team.
Sure. So the brief summary, kind of at first we're a fan data bank, so it's about connecting all the different silos of the data that's coming in and then making that active into revenue opportunities, right? And what we're also looking at that too is how to make the data itself and the database itself potentially an asset on the balance sheet eventually. And while that might sound far out, one news recently that I think is kind of an interesting canary in the mine is United Airlines that just got a loan of $5 billion based on the loyalty point system, putting that up. And so as crypto and all these other things are kind of bringing together new questions about what's a bank, what's an asset, it's bringing kind of new things to bear that I think the sport industry, especially with the NFTs and everything else, this is pushing these things with a certain acceleration that probably didn't exist, even 8 months ago, right? And so, I think with regard to Williams, I think what's interesting here is that, for most in the sports industry, the primary beginnings of any database are in the ticketing system, and that's usually the disciplines that kind of follow from that. You have different sets of kind of questions and opportunities within how we collect, acquire data. What are the relationships? How do those evolve between data trading between team and league, opportunities between driver and team? How does that move? Those kind of elements, and I think also moving outside as you move into these extensions of where, as we move the brand, as Tim was saying, into lifestyle and these other personas, there are now more activity opportunities within the extensions of digital content, digital engagement that's going up, outside the 3 days and into more of a 365 interaction between fan and team.
So Tim, let's just pick up a specific thing that's happening with the Williams team at the moment. You've got a star driver in George Russell, who is moving on at the end of the year and has been moved up to the Mercedes team. You've got another...
Across to the Mercedes.
Sorry, did I say up?
You said up.
I
Across.
do apologise. What a mistake to make. So when he moves across, you've got another British driver, Alex Albon, coming in next year. Are you expecting to lose? Is there a churn of fans that you're expecting as George Russell fans sort of go with him and Alex Albon's fans come in, or is that something you don't quite know enough about yet and is part of what you're trying to achieve here?
Certainly a bit of both. So I don't know the extent to which we'll see churn, but I know that churn will happen. I think the interesting part, though, and again, possibly a sense of the direction of travel when we talk about data and fan engagement, those kind of things, one of the questions we deliberately asked ourselves within the driver recruitment, now it was not the determining factor as to whether we recruited Alex for next season, but it was a conversation piece within the context of are options that we looked at, who is right for us from a brand, fan engagement, marketing perspective. And Alex, obviously for us and for me particularly, ticks an awful lot of boxes, and arguably some more than George. So the opportunities is definitely there. So yes, we do expect to see some churn. George has a significant following, but I also expect and hope that that churn will be equalised, or even the needle will swing to net positive when Alex joins us in January.
And the other thing to say about Williams is it is one of the most historic names in Formula One, and there are a lot of new teams who they all have a fan base, but the history, the heritage, I think certainly in this country there's a particular affinity with the Williams team, during a certain period of time. So again, is how much do you know about that sort of group of people who've followed the Williams story for, decades? It's maybe not the younger audience that you're necessarily chasing, but it's a key constituency.
Yeah, and I think the answer to that is I know enough to know the size of the opportunity. So we know that there are, if the numbers are to be believed, 341 million motorsport fans in the world who like or love Williams. We are everybody's second favourite team. So for me, the opportunity, if I did a direct correlation and put 341 million as an opportunity at the top of our funnel, we got a lot of work to do. And given, frankly, from a Williams perspective, where the team has been in the last few years, we know that mountain is quite a high one to climb. From a fan engagement, audience numbers point of view, for example, we're significantly lagging behind McLaren at the moment. They've done some great work in the last 3 to 4 years, and we're 3 to 4 years behind them in that kind of life cycle. And we've given ourselves 18 months to catch up. So that's the kind of first objective. 341 million motorsport fans. How many of those can we bring into the ecosystem that we've worked with Nick on to kind of convert them through the funnel? At the same time, as we talked about, then extending Williams beyond that. Where are the other segments? How large are they? What's the size of the opportunity? How do we draw them in to build a very compelling landscape of our sort of fandom, if you like? And that, again, to Nick's point, is the objective for us on that side is twofold. One, yes, absolutely, there is a monetization option, and I've always viewed monetization within fan bases is very transactional. It is obviously transactional. It's what can we sell them? What can we subscribe them to? And as Nick says, we don't have tickets. So we're limited by the inventory, but we're not limited by our creativity and what we try and do. Actually, for me, the bigger opportunity going forward is not the transactional value, but the asset value. And if we can start to demonstrate and prove that there is a consumer asset value to our fan base, based on the profiling that we have, based on the knowledge, the information that we generate and build, and based on the significantly increasing number of segments that we can engage with and have a touch point with, then there's an asset value that contributes to the overall organisational value. That's a pretty compelling proposition, and it's very compelling to the people who now own Williams.
More general question for you, Nick, and it's a big, broad question. What is the best way to nurture, maintain, and build a fan base, in your experience?
Well, I think the first one is to think that you've got two axes to consider, I think. So if you're going to build your fan database and the asset value of it, right? So level one, more fans, got it. Okay, but I think we need to understand that as we move alongside of what can we know, so if you imagine an Excel sheet in your head, we have the fans going down one side, then it's what do you know about them going down the other? And that the quality elements, okay? And you can think about, a fan base is not kind of, we hear, in the market that, I have followers, and if it's followers, I'm one of 5 brands that the fan follows. And then a fan is just me, right? That's a kind of paradigm you're hearing. But like within the fan, what are the different levels of fandom? And so, for example, in F1, and Williams is a great example of this. It's like separating how a fan of Williams for 40 years versus, okay, I just started watching Drive to Survive. I've selected Williams, but how you want to talk to me just in those cases are going to be very different. And especially as you get into extending to lifestyle branding and these sorts of things, you're having these kind of mini personas, and within each of those, there are different opportunities in the quality of the data points that are filling out the resolution of who the fan is. So what I mean is, not all data is created equal. If I have something like simple like birthday, okay, is that coming from a government ID? That would be probably the pinnacle of value, or is age manifest from a third-party data system, like in the States we have Axiom or Experian, you have Mosaic here, these sorts of things, or YouGov type of thing, where in that case you could match it to emails and get a sense there. It's obviously less accurate, right?
We have a question that has come in. Keep your questions coming in, which says, how do you bring fan and all other relevant data together? And I guess this gets to the crux of it. You've got data sets all over the place, all sorts of different metrics that are important, but need to be grouped together and made sense of. What's the best way to approach that? And I guess that's a job that gets ever more complicated as more and more data sets become available to you.
You phone Nick. That's how you do it.
Well, I think, there's kind of two sides to this, and I think that honestly there's an art and a science in this, and sometimes when it's not done well, one is overpowering the other, and they need to be in balance. And so I guess from a strategic art standpoint, it's really trying to understand and getting the work done. And we see this with a lot of other clients that we're working with, agencies that are setting up the persona models and those sorts of things, and then having that conversation says, okay, now as we look to the priority, we want to prioritize the sources, prioritize the data that's coming together, and really understand at the end of the day what are the few KPIs or goals that we're trying to do, and that might change over time, so this needs to be agile. For example, is the goal initially that we're trying to acquire fans? If so, can we be more specific than just fans, as I was just talking about, and say, oh, I just want this specific persona? Women between 18 and 30 that are in Merseyside, for example. Okay, well, let's go do that, because the content that they're engaging in might be very different than somebody else. So connecting those bits, that then can determine how you approach the data problem, which when you're talking about different sources, right? Let's just talk about Facebook data, for example. How you approach that can be very, very different in terms of what your end goal is. As a quick example, there's aggregated things that you can get off of your Facebook insights and sending out APIs. That's one approach. It has a variety of different limitations. The other bit is, and I think this is the core theme, work with your fans and build the bidirectional relationship very specifically, so they ultimately are in charge and you are really a steward of this responsibility with not just collecting their data, but making sure that you're working with it and you're providing value from that, and you can track that, right? And so in the context of Facebook data, that is how you can get data, from the Facebook system into your system, has to do ultimately with the fan providing that access, and that can be extremely valuable.
Tim, just on the way that you use data, I would imagine one of the ways you use it is to talk to potential commercial partners. And we are talking about ever more sophisticated ways of collecting, interpreting, and then presenting back data and using it to make better decisions and to give a more transparent view of what's going on. You mentioned earlier, I think it was 341 million global motorsport fans. As you're talking to brands, at the end of 2021, are brands generally still impressed by those big headline numbers? Or is that more the sort of door opener to get you into a more forensic conversation?
No, I think I use that number as an internal objective as opposed to an external sales tool. I think for me, the opportunity, and it's always been the case, and unfortunately I'm too old now, but throughout time in the sports industry, we've always kind of struggled, and the sponsorship element and the kind of commercial partnership element has always, I think, struggled to keep up with, or at least be seen as sophisticated as the media buying sector or the advertising industry or whatever. And it was always that struggle, sponsorship was the last thing you did, or the bit at the end of the table. Not so much now. But the reason it's not so much now is because we're now able to have far more credible conversations with potential commercial partners about the value that we can bring. And it isn't eyeballs, and it isn't seconds of media exposure, and it isn't how big is the logo on the car. It's how many of the people you want to speak to can you do with and through us. And if they've done their work, which most brands have, they understand their audience far better than we can. And it's about the cross-section. It's about that inflection point between our audience and theirs. In order to increase the value of that, you increase the size. You then become on par with any media buy decision. And if you can become on par with any media buy decision, then you've got a great chance. And increases the zeros in any deal because you're on par with out-of-home advertising, TV advertising, and any other medium. But until now, or until recently, I don't think many rights holders have been able to have that conversation on those terms.
Yeah, and just to kind of add to that from a data, almost to your last question, from a data perspective, is looking at this. Traditionally, speaking from a data perspective, right, the intelligence and the optimizations in a club or a rights holder are generally specific very much to division, right? So ticketing data will stay in the ticketing department. They'll use it from our ORI. E-commerce, same way, and those are in the transactional sides. Now, when you start to move this laterally and have more conversations across the suite so that you're involving sponsorship and the marketing for sponsors, marketing to grow the brand, you start to find out that there is, data, by connecting, there's data in the ticketing and e-commerce that could be valuable to sponsor, because we can start to use this to kind of understand purchasing power in a way that's better than just household income, which is generally just based on a zip code or a postal code, which, by the way, are less accurate in urban environments, which is the global trend of where everybody is. So there's these kind of massive holes in these things, and ultimately the other bit as well that sometimes, because of the data history coming out of transactional elements, which of course it is, we must remember that continues to be great. However, now that is also fantastic audience measurement grist for the mill, right? And so sometimes we'll come to rights holders and where it's like, oh, I don't have enough data, I can't, but let's remember, Nielsen numbers, for example, in the U.S., is generally like 0.5% the U.S. population or 1% in certain markets, and almost every rights holder, let's say in local American markets or even in the global space, where you have a reach to have more information than even these kind of traditional panel bases, and they're more exact because you've actually got better data, and that should be increasingly compelling to brands who are trying to make decisions on where should we be marketing. We're trying to reach a certain element. Where should we do this, and how much should we be paying, and what could the growth opportunity be? And so this increasing ability for precision is one of the great opportunities of why to build this kind of system.
Tim, how different are the conversations in terms of data and information about fans between B2B companies and B2C companies?
I think from our perspective, they're markedly different because of the sophistication of a B2C company. I think there's a reason that there's a definite shift in certainly the commercial landscape of Formula One, which I can speak to. There's a definite shift in terms of enterprise business being more prevalent now across all teams than lifestyle or consumer brand businesses. I think there is that element, and this is, again, we're playing catch up on the consumer brand side. We're behind the curve in terms of the sophistication of data and the reassurance we can then sell in, and from our perspective, frankly, at this stage, the scale of data that we can then sell into or add, demonstrate value to a consumer brand on.
Just on that, do you think that's a particular challenge? And of course, the biggest football teams are global brands, but Formula One is such a global sport. There are a number of globally active consumer brands, but is that where the challenge lies really, in that there's at a global level, there is such an amount of data, there's so many different aspects of a relationship and how it's activated. Is that, do you think, one of the reasons why perhaps Formula One teams are not, or have so far not been able to, or do you think it's more a function of, as we come back to the start, not knowing enough about the audience, the fans?
I think, again, I'll probably talk from a Williams perspective rather than a sports perspective, and that may have therefore something to do with the answer, but I think it's more that to a consumer brand, Formula One's expensive. When it's in relative terms to other things they can do, I think you have to layer in, you always do, and actually Formula One I think will always do, layer in the B2B opportunities that it provides, and that's why we spend the millions that we do on our motorhomes and trackside hospitality bits, and there's the traditionalist in me says, long will that be the case, but I think when you stack up against other opportunities consumer brands have, it makes it harder, because of, whilst Formula One is global in its nature, of course, and it's pretty high up the ladder in terms of global sport, it's sometimes very challenging to stack up against other advertising channels or other channels. B2B is different, and to your question, yes, we do have different conversations with B2B because of there's a more one-to-one relationship requirement through B2B partners and things, and that's much easier to deliver, frankly, on the platform that we have.
A couple of questions that have come in from people watching. Maybe one for you, Nick. How does GDPR impact how data is used, shared, and traded?
It's obviously one of the...
We love a GDPR question, by the way.
We do. No, I mean...
a lawyer in the room.
Yeah. Look, it goes to, I think, the most important piece, right? I think we as consumers want to be in control. So I think ultimately having in control and transparency. So I think GDPR is a great rule, and these restrictions are great. But from this, what's happening here is like, okay, the technology is even better than ever to be able to, going back to that Excel sheet in your mind, that I was saying, okay, well, now the challenge is every little data point, we need to know which rights hold on to that, right? And so when you're creating a segment, keeping that together is a new challenge for technology. However, there's more answers than ever in doing so. We just did a large deal with the company Muta to support on some of these elements. But, it is, GDPR, it's table stakes. So that's kind of my first answer too. It's like,
and to that point, if I may just jump in on the outside, to that point, from a marketing guy's perspective, people might expect me to hate GDPR. I actually quite like it because it's table stakes, and it raises the bar for entry, and it makes everybody better. And anybody that can't meet that bar, great, they don't get to come in. So it makes it all more worthwhile.
Question, a wry comment and then a question here from
It's about Mercedes, right?
From Philip Sharp. No, I'm not mentioning them again. From Philip Sharp from InfrontX. This sounds a little like the quest for the Holy Grail. Nick, can you please give some examples of value that you've created for others by taking this approach?
Sure. I'd say you can call me Sir Galahad then. But yes, I mean, look. Are we here and we're going to expose the exact valuation? No, I think, in this bit, two things. Okay, as a value, in terms of the valuation elements, this is a process that we're doing right now, and we're in the collection elements, and we can, if anyone's interested, we can show demos and prototypes of this sort of thing. The other bit, though, is just on lifting transactional revenue, and we can discuss elements where we've done that for a variety of our different clients. But a lot of what we're doing right now for our clients and for Williams is about not focusing entirely on just lifting the transactional elements, but looking at how can we look at this entire database to do different things to move into the rights and sponsorship values? And so right now with most people, it's a collection and cleaning process to kind of get these things ready for the commercial side of the house.
And Tim, are you viewing this as a project that has an end point, or is this something that just rolls and rolls and rolls? No,
it definitely has an end point. I think for us, I'm certainly looking at this as a significant tool to be able to add value to the organisation. People will know the Williams was sold last year to private investment. That private investment has a minimum 10-year investment horizon on the business. What we're doing right now is setting up a framework by which we can demonstrate organisational value growth through not only commercial revenue and EBITDA, but also the asset value of our brand and the asset value of our consumers. Once that framework's in place, we will then refine, improve, make sure that it stands up to rigour, and I'm very confident that it will. And at some point on that time frame, we will start to report. And that for me is so does it have an endpoint? It does we're able to demonstrate that asset value, yes.
But to add to that comment, I think that this is a great example of the increasing trend in private equity in sport, and particularly Americans increasing that bit. And I think that's one of the things that we're seeing in the marketplace is an increased demand and interest, I'd say, from more of the rights holders who have had private equity investment. I think are getting different questions from the private equity groups. And arguably rightly so, because what they want to ultimately understand is, what is the value of my community that I've just bought, thinking about it that way, and how do I improve it? Because that's why I bought, that's why I made this investment, right? And I think looking at the unit economics of the community is, frankly, it's a new opportunity that we have as an industry because of new advances in technology that even are 8 months old. For example, in some of the NFT deals that you saw, with like Inter Milan and the things Socios is doing, for example, where can that go? And a lot of questions that brings up and opportunities.
A lot of questions that we will answer in about half an hour's time when we have the CEO of Socios on this stage. It all links together beautifully. Final thought from you, Tim. We talked at the start about Formula One as the sport, the 10 teams, who are of course competitive, but also to at least some extent have a shared responsibility for helping to build the sport. A wry smile there.
You think, right?
Well, this is my naive question to you, and you'll put me right. Is this something that you're looking at in terms of giving you a competitive advantage in your world against, compared to all the other teams, or is it something that ultimately could be something that the sport as a whole can embrace and use to help you all?
Both. So I think if you just look at the DNA of Formula One, it's all about first mover advantage. So absolutely, it's a differentiator for us. There's an internal rationale for why we want to do it, absolutely. There's a differentiation rationale as to why we want to do it, because we want to be the first and we want to be credible when we do it. It's kind of who and what we are. Do I think there's value then in everybody else doing it after that? Sure, of course, because that frankly adds credibility. It removes the notion that this is the Holy Grail if everybody then jumps on board. So as long as we're first, it's fine.
Good stuff. Good note on which to end. Good luck to the team for the rest of the season. I know it's a busy few weeks ahead, starting this weekend. And Nick, great to have you with us on stage here in London. Nick Goggans, Tim Hunt, thank you very much.